Oh, hang on just one second here.
No problem.
Um, I'm going to pause the recording for just a moment. I'm Once again, we welcome you to Moving Forward with Young Voices. We're happy to welcome Ted Newson back to the program. Ted is a contributor for Young Voices, but Ted, I know you wear other hats as well. Take a brief moment and tell us just a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Absolutely, Brian. It's good to be on. So, I am a young politics graduate working out of Westminster, London. Uh, Very, very new to the political commentating scene, but eager for more and eager for every bit of experience that people would throw at me.
Well, I'm looking at an article that you had published on Substack, and I have to. I look at the headline: "Calling Reform UK Nazis. This Remembrance Sunday is an insult to those who fought." And you know what? I guess I hadn't realized that's something I hear a lot here in the U.S. I didn't realize that this is common as well in Britain. That political opposition, in order to tar their opponents, will sometimes call them Nazis. Talk to me first of all a little bit about Remembrance Sunday. What exactly does that represent? And then let's talk about why this is an especially inappropriate insult for those who are hurling it.
Sure. Remembrance Sunday is essentially like Memorial Day in the United States. It's when, on the 11th of November every year, we take a moment, a minute's silence, to remember the fallen dead from World War One and World War Two. It's a time of extreme reverence. You sing songs, you sing the national anthem, you lay wreaths, and it's a time of contemplation to remember the sacrifice that your ancestors have made for the country.
Okay. I mean, that sounds very reasonable. That doesn't sound like an occasion for name calling, but talk to me about the name calling that was taking place and what prompted the response in your writing this.
Well, Brian, this is the context that we're working on. A member of the newly founded Jeremy Corbyn party. It's called Your Party. It's more socialist than the Labour Party or the Green Party in Britain. Uh, it's almost revolutionary socialist, and they're already coming apart at the seams. But I digress. One of the MPs in this party thought it would be a good idea a couple of weeks before Remembrance Day to go on the record saying she thought the leader of the new right wing party in Britain, Nigel Farage, was a Nazi. She stopped short of calling the electorate and the people that support reform Nazis, but we all know what she was going on about here. We know ultimately she has a very, very poor opinion of the people that aren't sympathetic to her socialist values and ultimately wants to bring down both them and their party in reform by baselessly calling them names such as Nazi and fascist, which is incredibly inappropriate at a time such as Remembrance Day, which was only a few weeks after when she said it.
It seems that on the I'm going to call it the far left, but the socialist all the way to the communist left, their favorite epithet to hurl at people is to call them Nazis or to compare them to Hitler. What exactly is it that Nigel Farage is doing different from those who are currently in power, or suggesting be done different from those who are currently in power that that would prompt that kind of a comparison? Or is it just hyperbole on the part of this your party MP?
Well, Brian, it's a very similar thing to what's happening in the US with the ICE protests. What was maybe firmly just right wing, maybe 10, 15 years ago, aka deporting people who have no place in the country, that is now far right. And these bad actors from the far left, such as Zara Sultana of your party, is capitalizing on this kind of Overton window shift towards the left, this great fracturing in politics and fracturing of the two-party system. And she's wanted to frame anything outside of even left-wing politics, let alone moderate politics, as something that's somehow extreme. And I think it points to how for so long in this country we've been on a trajectory of moderate centrist politics, and anything outside of that has been politically untouchable. And now things got so bad in the country, we're starting to see a kind of reaction to that. We're starting to see a reaction to immigration. And back in the late 90s, when we were deporting tens of thousands of people a year who had committed crimes in the country and had no right to be here, all of a sudden, a policy such as that Reform is proposing is far right.
You point out in your article too that for reform to come into the kind of influence that it's come into, this is not an accident, and it's not just an unfortunate mistake. This is in response to a growing disconnect that the populace is feeling between itself and its government. Talk to me about some of the things that are driving some of that friction, at least on the part of the people who feel that they're not being represented.
Well, ultimately, the people are tired of being called names such as Nazis for holding views that a generation ago were perfectly normal views to hold. If you commit a crime in a country and you're a foreign national, if you murder someone, you should be deported. That is a common sense view that doesn't seem very common anymore in our political class. So ultimately, what has driven this clamoring to a new right wing party that's not the Conservatives is their complacency with occupying the centre ground. And we're now starting to see the Conservatives go back to first principles and back to basic right wing politics because we've seen the electorate shift away from this Cameronite, medium style, centrist politics that's worked in the past, but no longer works anymore. The people see the damage that mass immigration is doing. They see the damage that a massive welfare state is doing to their tax burden and to their living standards, and they don't like it anymore. So they've gone to a new right wing party. That's not far right. That's not unusual.
Ted, as an outside observer, um, it appears that it's very, as I look over, toward Britain and some of the news stories that I see coming out of there, it appears that it's actually risky for a person just simply to be patriotic. You don't have to have a beef with any particular ethnicity or anything like that, but if you are proud of your government, proud of your heritage, it appears that I've seen some stories that brings some very unwanted scrutiny by the authorities on people if they so much as, for instance, raise a flag or otherwise express, an outward expression of love for their country. Um, is it that bad? I mean, I'm seeing it through a lens of it's coming to me through different information sources, so I have to allow. Maybe it's being distorted, but as someone who's actually there, do you feel like you have to tread very lightly in how you express your
You're,
patriotism?
you're exactly right. You've hit the nail on the head there. One of the headlines today that caught my eye was a council, I can't remember which, was proposing, well, no, implementing a policy of taking down approximately 700 Union flags that had been illegally flown on council furniture simply because they made an excuse. They said that people in the area who weren't British were getting intimidated by the flag of the nation they're living in. Personally, if you're intimidated by the idea of Britishness, you shouldn't be in Britain. And that's a basic policy. You should be proud of the country that's hosting you. You should want to integrate, want to engage with their traditions. And if that's not something you're willing to do, the door is there for you to leave.
But that road only seems to run one direction, right? It seems like the people who have immigrated, particularly those who do have no interest in assimilating and in fact make a point of nope, we're not you and we don't want to be like you. They seem to get the most protection, while the people who actually have, heritage and skin in the game, so to speak, um, it seems like all of the pressure is being put on them to conform as opposed to do I dare say the word guests, who have come to their country.
Yes, well, it's this kind of paradox of tolerance where for so long you put up with intolerance towards your own culture and your own traditions, even your own national flag, that ultimately it's the outsiders who have the influence over the culture. And at the moment, we're seeing the growth of UK politics, YOOKAY, which is essentially a pseudonym for anything that is globalist and international, not British. So, for example, a massive group of delivery drivers crowding outside a supermarket, simply staring at passers-by, talking in foreign languages, and using their phone all the time. That is a prime example of the UK because it doesn't resemble Britain even 30 years ago, let alone under the last Conservative government. And we've slipped so far away from this kind of basic Britishness that parties like Reform are rising up. They're saying do need to take this back. We shouldn't be afraid and ashamed of our cultural heritage. And we should take back the narrative. And that's what we're doing. That's what Reform are doing at the moment. So I'm glad that a political party has come along and said this and almost kicked the Conservative Party into gear and realized that going back to Conservative principles is popular with the electorate, is going to win votes on the ballot paper, and ultimately is what is going to get them back into power, whether it's in a coalition with Reform or whether they overtake Reform in the end. We don't know.
It almost seems as if this is part of a larger effort, and I see this in the US, although I don't see it quite as pronounced as what you're dealing with in the UK, to put distance between people and their heritage, or their history even. The less they can remember, or the less they are allowed to celebrate their heritage, the greater control they can be placed under by, I guess, whomever wants to shape them for the world citizen or whatever it is that they feel is better than that history or heritage that's being left behind. Um, what do you see at the individual level as the best way for a person to be able to stand up against that without finding themselves, in jail or other legal jeopardy? Is it possible to stand up for your heritage and stand up for your nation and be proud of it without incurring that kind of risk?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're completely right about our culture and our traditions kind of being forgotten, and the more we forget, the more we can realize, the more that we forget how good we once had it. Going back to the topic of Remembrance Day, it certainly feels almost a little bit naughty in Britain to be patriotic and to kind of hark back to our grandparents' generation who fought for this country and fought for values like freedom of speech and just tolerance, but kind of rugged uh, championing of our own British culture above all else. And we seem to have lost that in our society. If we can go back to first principles, if we can get back to where we once were in terms of patriotism being an acceptable thing in every single political party, in every single person's life, I think we'd see a much more prosperous Britain. There's a lot to do, but we shouldn't forget the societal impact of people's living standards and people's mental health. If people feel they can't be proud of their own country, they're going to go to reform, or they could go a lot worse, which I'm worried about.
Again, we are talking with Ted Newson, and I'm looking forward to our next conversation because now I feel kind of invested. Like I want to watch and see what is playing out in Britain. Where can people
Absolutely.
find you? Where can they follow you online?
So as ever, I can be found on Twitter at Newson Ted. I post pretty regularly there. I put up a recent article about youth unemployment in Britain and the recent budget. I look forward to seeing you there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Hey, we're happy to welcome Bojan Lazarevski back to the program. It hasn't been that long since you and I last spoke, but for those who are meeting you for the first time, Bojan, take a moment here to tell us just a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Thank you, Brian. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Um, Hello, everyone. Also, for those who haven't heard me until now, my name is Boyan, and I'm tuning in from North Macedonia, where I'm based at the moment. I'm studying postgraduate studies in political science, and I've been contributor for Young Voices for almost 2 years now. So yeah, quite a lot of articles, and a few of them were related to tobacco and nicotine pouches. So this one is one of them that we will discuss today.
All right. And we're going to talk about Europe and regulation or banning nicotine pouches. I want to share a quick story with you. Bojan, about 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, I was driving through the Netherlands and stopped to grab something to drink at a fueling station. And I was surprised when I saw the cigarette packages and they had these horrific, nasty images of diseased lungs and cancer organs. And I thought, wow, they really take very seriously trying to discourage use of tobacco. Now, on that note, there are some alternatives out there. And I'm looking at your article here. Europe should regulate, not ban nicotine pouches. I've seen how far they're willing to go with actual tobacco like cigarettes. Talk to me about nicotine pouches and how does the European Union or the various nations within that union, how do they address those pouches versus either smokeless tobacco or cigarettes?
Yeah. Uh, I will first just add on that story. It's very interesting. Although my country, in Macedonia, we are not part of the European Union, but we also have these images on tobacco products for a longer period already. So I believe it's some sort of approach here, mostly in Europe, uh, to impact and let's say to reduce the use of tobacco, which is just one of the several strategies present here. But what's interesting is these alternative products that are already here. So I recently wrote this article discussing this debate around concretely nicotine pouches in Europe, which is one of these alternatives, because there's also snus and other similar products like vapes, which let's say they have different different harm levels and they are different with each other. But specifically about these ones, um, I mean, I'm quite interested in this topic because it touches on public health, consumer choice, and also evidence-based policy. And although I don't smoke myself, I want to highlight why regulation rather than outright prohibition in this case would be smarter approach, not complete ban. Because banning these products might seem like simple solution, but we have experience from countries like Sweden in the north of Europe where uh, which shows that strict regulation can protect young people, which is one of the concerns, reduce harm, and still allow adults to access some safer alternatives. So I'm citing several sources in the article why a balanced approach can achieve better outcomes for public health rather than a simple ban. For example, in these countries which impose bans, there are several, there is less reduction in smoking prevalence generally, and no legal alternatives accessible to those who seek to access safer options. So with countries like France, at the moment considering banning nicotine pouches, there is this risk of unintended consequences to push adults back into cigarettes, let's say, or perhaps other maybe unregulated markets. It also can happen. Um, so yeah, I mean, these nicotine pouches are relatively new smokeless products. They deliver nicotine without tobacco combustion. So that's why they have become popular alternatives, let's say, to smoking and also to vaping. So they satisfy to some extent cravings and some behavioral habits which are associated with smoking. And compared to cigarettes, they carry fewer toxic chemicals and no smoke, which means significantly lower health risks. And but this is the debate comes here that despite this, some policymakers and anti-tobacco groups they want to treat nicotine pouches the same as cigarettes in the same category, pushing for bans. But we have this evidence from countries like Sweden that I mentioned that suggests this might be counterproductive. I mean, they might not be risk-free, right? It's still a product in this caliber, but and overuse should be avoided, of course. But regulation and responsible use are the key to ensure that they remain a safer alternative rather than, let's say, a problem. So just banning them while allowing cigarettes doesn't make a sense. I mean, to public health, because cigarettes are still widely present. And if the goal is to reduce harm, maybe policymakers should focus on reducing also the use of combustive tobacco first, and allowing these alternatives with more maybe education and regulation who can access them, how, and to provide safe alternative.
You would think that these policymakers would be able to look at historically when someone in authority has said, you may not have this. People find a way. If it's something they want badly enough, they will find a way. I mean, in America, they actually had a constitutional amendment that banned the creation, possession, or importation of alcohol. And yet, people still found a way, and some people got fabulously rich because it was illegal and it artificially raised the scarcity and the price and so forth. As I read your article here, I can't help but come away with the idea that, first of all, you're not trying to say that, hey, this stuff is good for you, because you're not saying that. But what you are saying is that having alternatives is better than having a very limited number of choices that force people either into the clearly more dangerous alternatives like cigarettes, or for that matter, force them to the black market to get what they actually want.
Yep. Well, that's a very interesting and good observation, and we can see it in many different, let's say, topics like alcohol. There's some even research how banning other products is impacting how people access them or not. I mean, when a product is completely prohibited, demand doesn't disappear; it just moves into riskier, let's say, uncontrolled channels. And yeah, that might also be the case with nicotine pouches. So regulating them responsibly should be part of broader strategy to lower overall tobacco-related harm. There's this psychological aspect where people normally, uh, I mean, they have more attention to what's being banned at the moment, and rather than if it's accessible and safely provided, it might impact better how they access and use it. So that's why banning might not be the best idea. And if there are some concerns, they might be better tackled with this regulation. And looking into the Swedish example, there are some good lections that can be taken and put into consideration that can be applied maybe in other countries. Uh, I mean, one of the biggest problem is how to protect access of younger people while providing adults with safer alternatives, how to ensure that they come from, like, say, safer sources, and they are regulated enough, let's say.
Again, we are visiting with Bojan Lazarevski. He is a Young Voices contributor. By the way, thank you for taking on what is this is a touchy subject because this touches on a lot of personal choices, but I'm fully with you on this. Even if they're bad choices, having more choices are better because there's good, better, and best. And I trust people to make those choices for themselves rather than be treated like little children. For people who wish to follow you or find your work, where can they find you?
I would say still the best way would be LinkedIn. Just type my name and I should appear. So that's where I'm mostly active, also publishing some articles.
Thank you so much for being our guest today on Moving Forward with Young Voices.
Thank you so much for having me as a guest.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. We're happy to welcome Sam Rouse back to the program. Hi, Sam. Good to see you once again.
Good afternoon, Brian. So happy to see you.
Okay, for those who aren't familiar with you, maybe those who are hearing you for the first time, take just a moment to give us a little bit of your background, and then let's dive into a wonderful article that you've written about drug pricing politics.
Yeah, absolutely. I am the David Bowes Resident Writing Fellow at Young Voices. I've been contributing with the program for almost 2 years now, covering a lot of issues in the economic sphere and the tech sphere, but now really diving into some of the healthcare policy that's been going on lately.
Well, and prescription drug prices, boy, that's a big one. I mean, knock on wood, I'm very grateful. I don't have to take any medications daily, which, I hope is the case for many years to come. However, my 90-year-old mother, she, should rattle like a pill bottle because of all the different things that she has to be on a daily basis. And so I get to see the costs, even though she has some assistance, through Medicare and things like that. Um, the cost of medications is absolutely ridiculous. And I know a lot of families struggle with this. But you have an article here from AmericanMind.org, which says we tend to blame the wrong people or the wrong institutions when it comes to those high drug prices. So first of all, I want to ask you, who gets the blame for the high cost of prescription drugs right now?
Yeah, right now Americans are spending thousands of dollars a month on their prescriptions, and lawmakers have turned to blaming the pharmacy benefit managers, which are these financial negotiators between the drug manufacturer companies and the pharmacies that where most of us ultimately buy them, to negotiate the price and deal with kind of the supply chain logistics of pharmaceutical drugs. And lawmakers are trying to blame these people as the quote unquote middlemen, saying that they are inflating the prices to extract money out of the process and price gouge. Um, but the reality is the data shows this is really not true. The PBMs are, one, really not price gouging when it comes to the prices of most normal drugs. The data that keeps getting put out in a lot of political reports is only reflective of a number of specialty drugs that frankly have high prices because they are hard to produce and there's a low volume of them. It's supply and demand. And then there's a lot of blame being put on the PBMs for trying to profiteer, that they're, extracting money out of the process and the price. But the reality is that pharmacy benefit managers have really low profit margins. They're not making much more than they need to operate. And what they're doing is providing an essential service in price negotiation for the pharmacies and for the manufacturers. That's something that we see in so many different industries. I mean, consultants and different financiers are hired for so many different business dealings. I don't see why pharmaceuticals should be dealt with any differently.
Now that makes sense. I have to ask this though. Um, PBMs were not the norm when I was growing up. My dad was a pharmacist, and I actually worked in his drugstore as a teenager. And I really haven't heard about PBMs until just the last few years. And can you give me a thumbnail sketch of why they came into play in the first place? I don't even know what their origin is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it comes down to the economics that we've seen across a number of different sectors, which is less and less, single individualized mom and pop stores, more large conglomerates reaching across the country. And that comes with, ups and downs. People run their small businesses, but obviously, big multinational companies are able to provide things at a much cheaper price, able to provide things at a more robust volume. And so PBMs have really come in as supply chains have become more complex as these, big companies like CVS and Rite Aid needed to be able to negotiate for the prices, and we're trying to, keep the prices low as possible so that they could make the greatest profit off of them, their businesses too. And so that I think that's really where it's come into play, is in order to negotiate on such a large scale on so many medications. I mean, we have so much more pharmaceutical options available these days than ever before, and so it just gets more and more complicated, like everything.
That's a fantastic explanation, by the way. Thank you. That I feel like for the first time now, I actually, oh, so that's why they're there. Now, having said that, you point out in your article the real culprit of the overpriced medicine isn't those pharmacy benefit managers, it's the bureaucracy. Please expand on that. Let's kind of describe what that bureaucracy is.
Yeah, absolutely. There's really nothing to be blamed on people in the private sector negotiating prices through whatever business model that they want to formulate. The issue is we have an FDA process that's extremely slow, extremely difficult to get new drugs through at the end of the day. And that creates a lack of competition, a lack of growth in the market for, new medical options. What we also see is there's a number of regulations around pharmacies and around the prescription of drugs. These are typically known as scope of practice laws that determine who can prescribe what, where, and when. And that makes it really difficult for people a lot of times in rural areas or places where there's not as many pharmacies to be able to get the medication that they need on time for their treatment. And this keeps prices high because when the supply is limited to only certain options and it, has to go through all this process, the pharmacies are looking for other ways to make money and they ultimately have to keep the prices up a certain level. So when we give more options, we have more competitiveness. I think really the FDA reform, and we're starting to see some of that from this administration, but doing a lot more and getting new medications approved, getting a lot of things deregulated and letting some of these natural options be available, letting more things be over the counter, and let people be able to choose what they need and buy what they feel is best for their health really could make this a big difference. And I think we're seeing some other things on the foreign policy scale I haven't been following as much, but I think really deregulation should always be the focus when it comes to economic policy and dealing with prices that are so high. And I mean, that's the name of the game now, affordability.
Oh, hey, the free market economist in my heart is like, yes, this man is speaking truth because it competition and the ability to you know cut through the red tape and cut through all the different hoops that have to be jumped through. But I'm gonna play devil's advocate for just a moment. For those who are saying, but wouldn't this lead to, dangerous mistakes in drugs? After all, even the FDA, with all of its slow walking, the approval of various pharmaceuticals, still gets it wrong once in a while.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at the end of the day, there's going to be a lot of conversations around how we expedite the process. And nobody's saying we're going to skip the science part of it. A lot of the FDA process is testing things, making sure they can complete different studies and are effective and all that. I think what we're looking at is ways in which we can make that faster, whether that is, changes to staffing, changes to the process, new technology, things that I think we can invest in that would allow things to be done at much greater scale and volume. I think there's a lot of conversations that, yeah, you can have a reasonable bipartisan decision on, maybe the state capacity of the FDA being a little bit larger would allow things to move faster and that those trade-offs would weigh out. But I think that any focus on these issues, we can't let fear of mistakes being made keep us from finding ways to improve efficiency and improve the system. I think that everybody wants more options, more competition, new cures on the market. And whether or not those ultimately are the best choice at the end of the day is to be decided by the patients and their doctors, not by the government.
I'm so happy to hear you say that. And I know there are those who think that, well, if there's any, reining in of regulation, that somehow that leads us directly to Thunderdome and it's every man for himself. And, the mistakes, well, if the drug kills you, then we just write down, well, that one killed him, so don't take that. Obviously, there are best practices that are in place. My question for you, though, is there the willpower within the bureaucracy or those who work within the bureaucracy to limit itself or to bring it to a smaller role?
Well, it depends. We've seen some progress made over this in the past year in things like foreign aid, and some of the financial regulatory agencies, but ultimately DOJ has really wound down. And I think that there's a lot of questions as to its future and what that whole deregulatory politics will look like going forward. I think there's a lot of people becoming more and more interested in this topic, in this approach to things, in a number of policy domains that haven't really been pursued yet, specifically in drug pricing, specifically in things like infrastructure and energy. And so I think it really comes down to the framing and being willing to have the conversation in a way it's deliberate and focused. I think people get afraid, yeah, when you just start ripping out things without knowing what you're doing versus having a strategic plan to it, and having considerations to the broader changes that need to be made. And maybe sometimes, you increase in this category in order to decrease in another one. Um, I think that that's much more likely to happen. But I think overall, people are starting to wake up to ways in which deregulation can be considered in all of these fields, and healthcare is really the name of the game in policy right now. I mean, it's one of the most expensive things that we all spend on as a country, and so bringing down those prices is going to be critical. Whoever's in power, whoever is running for office going forward.
Once again, we are visiting with Sam Rouse. He is the David Bowes Resident Writing Fellow at Young Voices and also a political analyst. And Sam, for people who wish to follow your work or otherwise connect up with you on social media, where can they find you?
Yeah, they can find me on X at Sam Rouse 1.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome back. This is our fourth and final segment of Moving Forward with Young Voices. I'm joined by Tate Kaufman, who's a Young Voices contributor, also a Mercatus Center graduate scholar and editor of the National Security Law Journal. And I probably left a few things out there. Anything you want to fill in for us, Tate?
Albertan, a proud Albertan.
There we go. Glad to have you on the show today, and good to see you once again. We're going to talk about a Bitcoin forfeiture. Now, I was telling you before we went on the air here, I've been very tapped into civil asset forfeiture and very opposed to it because to me it just kind of looks like theft under official auspices. But this is the first time I've heard about Bitcoin being forfeited. Tell me a little bit about this case. And first of all, how much did they take?
They took $15 billion worth of Bitcoin, although I'm sure after the past month or so, that's probably diminished quite a bit. But yeah, so the federal government seized $15 billion in Bitcoin from what's called a pig butchering scheme, which is essentially sort of an online romance scam where people from generally abroad, in this case, it was a group in Cambodia, find targets, generally lonely older men, impersonate young women online, fatten the pig up through romance and messaging and whatnot, and then do some sort of request where they say, I'm coming to meet you, but they're demanding an extra $2,000 to get on my flight. And then that's when you butcher the pig and take them for all they're worth. So this Cambodian outfit, which I suppose was incredibly successful, had over $15 billion in Bitcoin accrued over the course of its scam. And so that has made when it was busted, the feds forfeited that. Using process known as civil asset forfeiture, which is where they take any of the instruments or proceeds of crime upon a arrest. And in this case, that amounted to $15 billion in Bitcoin.
Okay, bear with me for a moment, but let's talk about the difference between taking it upon arrest versus taking it after a trial and conviction. In other words, after full due process, yep, this person did something illegal. They've profited from it illegally. They don't deserve to keep those profits versus you have a lot of something. We think you're dirty. We're going to take it. Somehow those two things do not seem comparable to me.
No, I mean you would think your Fifth Amendment due process rights before liberty or property is taken from you, that you have a right to due process. And it's true that there are ways for innocent people to get their money back, but it's incredibly complicated. And I actually misspoke. They don't even need to arrest you. They just need to suspect that the money or whatever property it is. There's an example being litigated by the Institute for Justice right now out of California, where there was a post office operation with P.O. boxes, and the Fed suspected that some of those P.O. boxes were being used for crime. But rather than selectively target the ones that were being used for crime, they seized everyone's P.O. boxes at this entire outfit. And people who were completely innocent had to then go through the nightmare of paperwork to try and get this back. And lo and behold, surprise, surprise, sometimes civil asset forfeited property goes missing once it's been taken. Sometimes parts of it disappear. They can't quite find it all to get it back to you. And so it disappears into the endless coffers of government.
Oh, that doesn't sound good at all. But now we're dealing with crypto, which is a totally different thing than tangible, cash or gold or silver or things that they can put their hands on. Talk to me a little bit more about how is crypto changing that equation when it comes to um, how criminals store their plunder, or how governments go about taking it.
Yeah, so one of the really unique things with crypto forfeitures, as I mentioned earlier, the process, if you're innocent, to get these assets back takes a long, long time. And with assets that rapidly appreciate or rapidly depreciate, like crypto, that means that there can be a huge change in value from the time of forfeiture to the time of return. But unlike something like a car or just plain cash, which generally tend to stay around the same value over the course of a couple of years, give or take inflation. But what's really interesting about crypto is because the government is allowed to use things at civil asset forfeits to fund law enforcement, and simultaneously, the current administration is trying to build up sort of its big crypto reserve. There are questions about whether this money that's been civil asset forfeited in the form of Bitcoin can be used to start funding that reserve, or alternately, to directly fund enforcement, to fund the activities of law enforcement organizations.
So what's the political mood as some of these changes start to come about? Obviously, the political sands are still kind of shifting. Just because of the outcome of last year's election doesn't mean that we won't have, kind of a different playing field after the midterms next year. Where is Congress on all of this?
Well, Congress has been pretty active in pushing ahead some, especially the Stable Act, which is creating stablecoin legislation, regulating it, bringing it into sort of mainstream fold. There's also a few other cryptocurrency acts that are being passed around and moving through to try and regulate crypto as a asset via the CFTC or SEC. And all these actions will make crypto a much more, I think, I hesitate to say reliable, but in any case, a much more, at least appearing reliable, legitimate asset that more Americans, more businesses feel comfortable in investing in. And so as the economy pushes towards this more heavily crypto direction, that means more funds that can potentially be seized in crypto and more profit that can be made off of those seizures.
Okay, and I have to ask this because I'm still kind of a neophyte to cryptocurrency, but one of the strengths of crypto, as I understood it, was it kept it out of the reach of people that you didn't want to have access to it. Now, assuming that you are holding that coin wallet or whatever it may be called today, has the ability to gain access to people's funds, has that changed, or is it still a very secure way of holding value?
Well, I mean, it's about as secure as it gets, but the government at the end of the day, if they want to seize crypto, they know you have. Of course, part of the nature of the blockchain is that it's anonymous in the sense that you are just a numerical hash, you're just an ID. But if someone can look at all the transactions, because the blockchain is public, on Bitcoin at least, there are some private chains, they can look at who's making all the transactions and deduce that your hash belongs to you. Now, that doesn't mean they can access your account, but it does mean that they can look at who you are, how much value you hold, how many bitcoins you hold on chain, and
Is that
then we're
all
back,
public information?
all public information on the block.
Oh, okay.
If your hash can be deduced,
Okay.
which is increasingly easier to do with things like Coinbase, that sort of store user hashes, because then third party doctrine, which is the idea that if you share something with a private party, the government isn't doing a search when it goes to look for it. So then what they can do is, I mean, they can't compel you to actually hand over the Bitcoin in the traditional sense, because unlike cash, unlike property, there's nothing to physically take. But what they can do is they can hold you indefinitely until you tell them what your key is, and then they can go in and take your account. So I mean, someone really strong-willed who isn't willing to give up their key, who only has it stored in here, the security's there. It's 100%. It's as strong as your will is. But for people who are willing to give up the key in order to get out of detention, that security becomes a lot more lax because it's your life on the line after all.
Your article points out, I think, two very necessary things that I consider the takeaways here. Number one, be very careful with the executive branch, particularly as it pertains to, some of these crypto seizures. And basically, the executive branch seems to be edging out off of its leash, and Congress needs to assert its proper authority. Secondly, civil asset forfeiture reform is desperately needed sooner than later. Tell me your take as far as is there the stomach for it within Congress? Will they assert themselves and reclaim their rightful authority? And on the other hand, the civil asset forfeiture, is there the will to stop taking people's stuff?
I'd like to think so. I mean, the American public is increasingly dissatisfied with civil asset forfeiture. And in the article, I mentioned the recent CFPB case from a few years ago, where the CFPB was created and had this sort of novel funding mechanism where it got to choose how much of the federal fisc it took each year up to a certain statutorily prescribed cap. Now, that's not how Congress's power of the purse typically works. Typically, each year, an agency makes an appeal for an amount of money, and Congress decides how much to give it on a year by year basis. One of the dangers of civil asset forfeiture, especially as we move to these big ticket crypto seizures, is that because it goes straight into executive coffers, it can be used to fund whatever generally law enforcement activities the executive wants to do. And as we move into the midterms here, and I think we're looking at the Democrats picking up a lot of steam in the midterms, they are quite likely to try and exercise the power of the purse to prohibit some of the ICE and National Guard actions that President Trump has been engaging with. And if President Trump can use seized assets in order to fund those activities free from the will of Congress, or alternately, if he's able to receive private donations of hundreds of millions of dollars, as he did during the shutdown to fund military salaries, that really reduces Congress's control over the might and the sword of the executive. And I think even outside the current, yes, sorry, Brian.
I'm sorry, we're up against the clock. We are
Okay.
unfortunately running out. This is a fascinating subject, and I encourage our listener, go dig deep. You will be very happy that you did. Tate Kaufman is a Young Voices contributor, Mercatus Center graduate scholar, and editor of the National Security Law Journal. Where can people find you online?
They can find me on X now. I have an X account at The Libertator, or on LinkedIn at Tate Kaufman.
All right, thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian.